We talked a little bit, I think, in the beginning of the day about cultural clashes. There has been something about, oh, we Swedes are shy and maybe not the best of storytellers. And maybe you think, oh, okay, enough with this cultural clashes, but we love to talk about them, right? Even in Scandinavia, we are super alike, Danes and Swedes, but the best thing we know is to talk about how very different we are. So I think we'll have some stories for you. And I mean, when you come to the global scene, it's also sometimes that you find yourself in unexpected situations, maybe even a cultural gap between you and the way business is conducted. So, my dear panelists, I'll introduce you. Here to my left is Ben Wu, your healthcare director at Agio Capital. Welcome. And sitting on the far left here is Stefan Sandström, founder and CEO at the BioSector in Japan.
Thank you.
And Andreas Schmidt, I'll see if I can get all of this right. You're a PhD Senior Vice President, Head of Global BD at Singleron Biotechnologies, and founder and managing director at Springboard Health Angels, correct?
Yes, you got it all right.
Yeah, well, you can also, if you have a hard time remembering that, you can just say you're a scientist turned serial entrepreneur turned investor.
True.
Okay, so we'll start things off. What is the hardest thing for a Scandinavian, or maybe Northern European, person to overcome in order to make it on the global scene? Don't be so cordial. Please grab this one, Andreas.
Of course, I'm not like directly from the Nordics, but at least from northern Germany. Hopefully that qualifies half. I think there are plenty of German cliches of being like too focused on quality and of getting things right. And I had the marvelous opportunity to start my first company actually as an immigrant entrepreneur in Singapore. Basically, my role was actually to not know about this cultural context and rather break things and build things up. And I think that's the major obstacle for Germans is like quality-driven, getting things right, making sure that the last check of everything is there, and rather adopting like 80-20 or it's kind of right, let's move on.
Yeah, well, two German parents, I can relate to that. Stefan, as the only Swede and Scandinavian on the stage except for me, what do you think? What is the hardest thing for us?
So I have some pointers. So, I call it the kindergarten teacher mentality. I think Swedish people should stop telling others what they need to do. It can be tedious. And also this perspective that you need to have, that Scandinavia, it is actually a tiny part of this world. It exists. We have had a very successful, what do you call it, social experiment that seems to go a little wrong now, but I hope it will come back stronger. So we don't need to talk about Sweden or Scandinavia or IKEA. People already know that they exist. So we can broaden our minds and look at the world for what the world actually is. I think that's important because it brings discourse into a higher level. And as you pointed out, salesmanship and presentation skills, talking in front of an audience, just we need to be better. And the only way to do that is to practice. Just go out there, challenge yourself, and see how you can learn. We have fantastic salesmen and saleswomen in Sweden, and learn from them. I mean, that's what we're here for, to do the best we can with what we have. And the last thing I would like to point out is that I'm sounding very negative, but
we just begun. You'll have some time.
Okay, so this is the thing about getting a no and getting rejected. It's like the worst fear that Swedish people have. But when you think of it from a different way, I think this is more logical. If someone says no to you or you say no to someone, you save everybody's time. Your time is saved if someone says no, because doing business with someone you don't like or that is not a good fit, it is going to end in disaster anyway. So it's better to stop it early than to hang on until the bitter disaster comes. And I like to think of it, as I live in Tokyo, I've been there now for 18 years, In metropolitan Tokyo, we have 40 million people. And since I'm a little bit of an eccentric, maybe 1% of the people there could be my friend. So if you translate 1% of 40 million, you end up with 400,000 people. That could potentially be a good friend. So say I can Google them and find a list of all these people. Okay, so I spend 10 minutes with each of them. And if I don't sleep and don't eat and don't do anything, I will need to do this for 75 years to just have a small talk with them. So imagine if I spend 1 hour with a person that is not ever going to be my friend, I have wasted the chance to meet 6 of these fantastic people. So that's how I think. I can say more, but I stop there.
Well, Ben, as we already said, of course, there are some stereotypes about Scandinavians, about Europeans. I think we know them. Germans, super efficient, super perfectionist. Swedes, very shy, very reliable. Do you find them accurate, or are these just in our heads?
I will address this from the receiving end. Like so when we are at the receiving end, you're comparing, okay, I'm a BD person in China, I talk to Europeans, I talk to Americans, I talk to other Asians, right? So my overall impression, I wouldn't know Nordic, how it's very different from the rest of Europe. So Europe in general, I would say, you got to be more confident. You have good stuff. You have better stuff than the US. Right, generally speaking. So why be shy? So we know how your competitors are selling their stuff. You can do the same. You can do better. Sometimes they overdone it. Like, so I think we are, I mean, especially talking about Asian and European culture, they're more similar than between Asia and Americans. Right? So very often we think, the American party is overly aggressive. Right? Some of the CEOs, yeah, I'm not going to name who. So that can be. And the other point I want to raise is that you be more confident. And the storytelling part, which we have talked about several times today, is very important.
I mean,
Andreas,
maybe the one thing I truly admire, particularly in China, is speed. In every aspect. I mean, you said that earlier of like how fast was Shanghai, the new Shanghai, the Pudong built. But I mean, my second company got acquired now again by a Chinese company, and the speed of doing things. I mean, we launch products faster than I'm even aware that we launched them sometimes. And at my German side then bites on my teeth and say, did we do all the quality checks? And then I say, okay, we are now a Chinese company. We blast it out. We show we will improve it. We'll do that 3 times, and in the end, it's actually a very high quality product as well. Over the years, I got more playful with that. Like by now, if I present in Silicon Valley engineering from our company, I speak with particularly strong German accent. People get it. I want to highlight the quality. And afterwards, they laugh. They know I lived a long time in California. I don't need to do that. So.
Yeah, I would completely agree. I think if you look at the China workforce, or at least for now, they are workforce on steroid. So you get an email up to them, 11 p.m., you get an immediate response. I do that too, right? So you can expect that. Speed. So when a business development person in China with a company, sometimes you get very frustrated about, okay, we will schedule a call 4 weeks from now between 1 and 2 p.m. Are you okay? We can do it tomorrow. Yeah. So I'm exaggerating a bit, but maybe not that exaggerating. But that's, I think, a little bit of a cultural difference. Right? So China moves very fast. When you ask them to sign an NDA, they turn around within 24 hours. So that's the kind of speed and I think work cultural difference.
I'm sorry, do you relate to that, Stefan?
Well, yes. The Japanese mode of working is also 24/7, around 364 days per year, sorry. And it is fantastic. You get this idea and you need feedback and you send it out on Saturday evening, just before you go to bed. And when you wake up in the morning, you have a reply. And this is something that some of my colleagues that also work in Japan, they have left Japan because they get heart attacks. They have to work all the time. The phone is always on. You're always on duty. I think that makes projects very smooth, and you don't stop because there is a roadblock somewhere. Projects run smoothly. Then there are other differences, but I will not dive into them.
Well then, Andreas, I would like to know, like, how much have your style changed? Because now you have been doing deals in Asia for a while, if you compare to when you started out.
I mean, as I said earlier, I have a more playful attitude to that. I listen more carefully. I don't assume that I see the world correctly through my German myself, but can actually switch a bit more and try to take advantage of these opportunities. I mean, the feedback I constantly give in Germany is we have to be faster. Like, forget for quality for once, but just get it done, get the investment done. As a one fun fact, selling my company Proteona, I had no intent to sell it to a Chinese company. I had a conversation with the CEO of Singleron, and after half an hour we figured out, hey, we are competing. How do we resolve that? After another half an hour, we said, okay, it's a deal. You buy us, that makes sense for both. Within 3 months, we have done everything. Due diligence, like integrating the teams in different locations in the world, signing all paperwork, having an integrated company. Sure, afterwards, and I think that's, we were discussing that earlier, the Chinese mentality of signing something is, let's do this, let's figure out the rest later on. That end part of it, yes, we had to figure that out. But, well, that's fun part of it as well.
It's like Denmark and Sweden making business. Swedes love to plan it first. We come up with a plan and it'll take us a little time. We'll get there. With Danes, they like to jump ahead and then, we'll just change here and then we'll adapt some stuff. And then everyone in Stockholm goes, please don't.
Yeah, I think another, practicality, a practical tip is that the other side of the phone, it's going to be different as time evolves. When you first contact a BD person, they may not be the best scientist to understand your science. They are thinking about, okay, why are you good? Why are you better than your competitor? What's the market size? Because in their mind, they're thinking about, I need to fill in this Excel sheet. I need to value your asset and need to explain to my boss why I would recommend you. But once you pass that, you start to talk to more senior people in the other company or scientists, they would have different concerns and different questions. So it's not going to be one size fits all. You need to think more about the audience for that particular call, what they are looking for, and whether they are very well educated to understand the science that you're talking about.
Let's go in a little bit deeper into that, and I think you can actually start out, Ben, and then we'll cover all the regions that you are representing in some ways. What is very important to remember when you are looking to take your company to China, making deals when you haven't done it before?
Yes.
Small question for you there.
Yes, I think if you are a company of 10 people, don't attempt it. Don't try to do that. That will distract you from what you really should be doing, your science, you're looking into your product development in Europe and US, big markets. I will always think that as much as possible, find a good partner to partner with, because they know the local regulatory environment, they know how to get the trial started quickly. That's not something you can learn. It's a very long learning curve and can be very painful. So it's always good to at least seek local input or a good partner. And of course, doing due diligence with your partner is another thing.
However, Ben, you also said in your keynote speak just that it's really good to have a partner, but that will also give you a different kind of headache. What did you mean by that exactly?
Another example. There are, at least at the height of the bubble, around 2020, 21, there are many local Chinese companies just want to get the deal done so they increase the valuation so they can list. that kind of a partner is the partner you don't want because they have no intention to follow up anyway. And now we are seeing some of those actually happening, and trying to clean that up is messy. So a company may have submitted your file, then they're not following up. So according to the NMPA or Chinese FDA rule, you cannot change the submitting party once you submit it. You can retract it and resubmit, but you wasted the whole time. So that's the kind of thing that if you are with the wrong partner, then it's going to be very difficult to get out.
Stefan, I think you have something to say about this too, right?
Yeah, as I was talking about earlier, doing business with the wrong partner is always going to be bad sometime in the future. And I've seen so many examples of this. I have, of course, growing up, committed this sin, so to speak, of working so hard with a partner because I thought we will figure it out. But when you work with a company that is not interested in you or are not invested in bringing the business forward, it is just bad, simply. And speaking of China and the speed you have achieved there, in Japan, this is the worst thing about Japan. Everything is so slow. It is incredibly slow. So this was the first clash I had with the culture. Being entrepreneurially minded and having a little bit of ADHD, I want things to happen. And so I reached out to companies, presenting my first client very proudly, and I behaved like an American guy on steroids, and nothing.
Give us an example. What was the energy level?
No, I won't. And because of NDAs, I can't tell you who they were. But when you speak to Japanese people, you need to speak in a calm way, and you need to allow things to take a long, long time. And my immediate idea was the Ents in The Hobbit, or the Lord of the Rings. They just go on forever and nothing happens. But the good thing with Japanese companies, as all my clients that I always ever help in Japan, they will complain before we have a contract signed. They ask me to push harder or to make things happen faster, which is impossible. There are many reasons for this. But when a contract is signed, you have lightning speed. Everything works perfectly. And I have had no client ever complain about working with a Japanese company once the contract is signed. So then you have the speed. So getting there is the tricky part.
Yeah, we should all remember that the Ents did take over Isengard. So no, you'll make it in the end.
Yes.
No, but Andreas, and I think this question is for all of you that have done journeys, I mean, abroad and to new cultures. And what are some of the most unexpected, maybe weirdest situations you found yourselves in?
I share a story about sheep with you, and then tell you why that links to biotech. So it was a whole bus full of executives from various biotech companies in one bus driving through Germany, all from Singapore, on the way to Medica, biggest, the Düsseldorf exhibition, like gigantic. And all of a sudden they stopped in the middle of nowhere, and there was like large meadows and sheep. And all of them actually were super excited about that. And like there were a few Germans in it that they couldn't tell. Well, they are sheep and that's a meadow. And they were excited of like taking pictures, sending them back to their colleagues. And what I didn't realize, and should know better, of course, Singapore has one single farm. All food is imported. You don't have free landscape. It's because everything is built up and there are skyscrapers everywhere. And like this, the scenery was for them super impressive. And we didn't realize that people see something else looking at the same thing. And basically, we ended up in Medica, but it taught me a lot of important lesson. Also, later on in business negotiations, people see other opportunities. They're excited about other things. And also in the deals that you present to a Chinese company, or as you earlier said, to like the same venture capital company, but to the office in China and in California, has to be different. And people are excited about different things. And since that was the experience actually with life science executives, I kept that picture in my mind when I negotiate in China, in Singapore, in California, in Boston, in Munich or Berlin.
Well, would you say then that people get excited over in Singapore versus US, for example, because people are curious to learn your insights?
Like Singapore, clinical validation. If you think, I mean, Singapore is amazing. I mean, both of my companies, I started there as a German, as an immigrant entrepreneur, and still I'm super connected to Singapore. And actually, I like how you can do business there. It's super fast, technology driven. The country is super supportive for entrepreneurship and for want to always have the coolest and newest tech. A lot of what we do is related to clinical trials and so on. Well, it's an island, 4.5 million people. Like for most of the diseases, you won't get enough patients together. So they will have to partner. They will have to go out. Like for very early projects, for startups, it's completely normal to say, and this is our rollout strategy. Like there are 3 people and they talk about rollout strategy. In the US, people would say, well, complete distraction, forget about that, cover the US market or cover the Chinese market, that's big enough. If you do that well, you will roll out in the rest of the world. In Singapore, that's the opposite. So they're super excited about, and you have links to Germany. I didn't know that, actually, that people saw me favorable because I could credibly say, and then we will roll out the company to Germany and to California, I know whom to call. And I completely stood out there because I knew exactly which people to call. So, yeah, Singapore companies look for something else than the US company, than the German or the Chinese company.
Now we went serious again, but we promised you some rock and roll, and we have to deliver some of that, so I'll ask you again. When it comes to business and cultural clashes, what are some of the most memorable situations, maybe weird, maybe funny, you found yourself in? Stefan, we all want to hear about Japan.
Oh, where to begin? I mean, just trying to achieve something in Japan is a pain. So my first experience then, maybe it's not the funniest, but so the thing with Japan is that they are incredibly risk averse. They are so risk averse, I can have allergies just thinking about it. The people who are anti-vaxxers, for instance, they are not wackos. They just don't want to take the risk now, because the risk that comes later is maybe because medical progress will make it not a dangerous disease. So they have this risk averseness that kind of hampers how they do things. And they have memories like elephants, meaning that if you start a company and you make a mistake and the company dies, you will forever be labeled someone who had poor judgment. Forever. So being a Japanese person means whatever you do, you don't make a mistake. So what we can translate this to in the larger companies is that the management and the board directors, they would rather that company sinks slowly than they take any kind of business risk. There are, of course, exceptions to this, but this is the standard way of operations in Japan. That's why there are so many companies that don't produce any profits. And from the entrepreneurship point of view, coming with this backpack, of course, it's very difficult to be an entrepreneur in Japan. But they are slowly changing. The younger generation are accepting that you need to take risk. Still, the society doesn't accept people who make failures or mistakes, because it always will come down to you having poor judgment. Everyone will say, we told you so. And so the only good thing for me, then, many good things, but being a foreigner, it is okay to make a mistake because I didn't know better. And it's lovely. And So I will encourage anyone, if you want to be a rock star, that we talked about in Japan, allow yourself to make mistakes. People will forget them because you're not Japanese. It's brilliant and lovely. So thank you.
So I would love to connect to that directly. So my first company in Singapore started like right after my PhD, and then we had first good results, and then there was no lab space for early startup companies at that time, 2009. So all the incubators, none of that existed yet in Singapore. So we had to move the company to somewhere to hire people to have them work, and so I couldn't find anything, or we didn't have enough money. So at some point, I went to one of the professors we worked with. I took some tape and labeled actually like 2 benches and said, I want to rent this space from you and run the company there. The university put a lot of energy and also resources and money into that. Otherwise, we will die. The professor said, well, you can put tape there, but this will not go nowhere. I went to the dean. I later went to the president of the National University of Singapore and told them, well, you put so much resources into our company. We can't move anywhere. This has to be resolved. And he was laughing at me. I rented that space in that university because I made a good point. Of course, I broke all the rules that everybody was laughing about me. There was no bad intent. It was later actually mentioned by the vice president of the country, Singapore, as an innovative idea of starting incubators.
A good thing to be German in Singapore sometime. Ben, do you remember a time where you felt a little lost in translation?
I think well, I wouldn't say that's actually in our culture, probably. People come first. The people connection, you can't replace it with just video calls, right? And of course, in Asia, that means you go meet them in person and drink a lot with them. Right. So that's like 54% alcohol, rice wine, and then until you're completely drunk, and then you're a friend forever. So that piece, I think, it's always true. Like,
but as a Scandinavian, you should see this as an opportunity to come to China, right? There are some things you can already do well. Covering Germans as well.
right.
Sorry.
Do you have a response? No, please. Go on.
So I have been drinking a lot, and I'm still standing here with a damaged liver. But I mean, people connection is very important, no matter at whatever level.
Do you ever felt too challenged that way?
I try to pretend I drink sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, doing business in Japan involves a lot of drinking, and so they have 2 types of meetings. You have the formal meetings, and those are all about harmony. All the things we agree upon are reiterated, and you should leave the formal meeting feeling very good. And then we have the informal meetings, and that's where business is done. And at the end of the night, you remember some of the early things you talked about in the evening, but it's also due diligence, it's also building relationships. But business is done usually in bars.
Do you also smoothly drink water, pretending it to be something else?
No.
How do you do that, Ben?
After everybody else is drunk, they don't know what I'm drinking.
I think that is a perfect end to this discussion and smoothly transitioning into what will happen next. Thank you so much for taking the time and talking to us, and I'll look forward to hearing more about you guys tomorrow. So thank you, Ben Wu, Andreas Schmidt, and Stefan Sandström, everyone.